with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Rich, man, we got an incredible show. Just coming up here shortly, we have Dinesh D'Souza on, a really great friend of the show, has done so many important works, an author, filmmaker, commentator, and especially with what's going on in our country today, his views and what he has to say is very, very important. And then Stephen Moore, another great friend of the show, and he's going to be coming on to talk about the economic impact of what happened this week. But, it's not over. It's not over till it's over. But it looks like the markets, at least right now, are betting on gridlock. They're betting on Biden squeaks it out, maybe 272 to 260. I don't know, but it still can go the other way. And the Republicans have the Senate, and nothing gets done. And I think the markets are basically saying that's a good thing based on the alternative of Biden in a Democrat Senate. I mean, it would have been disaster. The fabric of America would be torn apart, and I don't know how you sew it back together.
Yeah, well, I think when we talk to Steve about this later, he'll agree. We didn't have a blue wave. I mean, that's one of the things that the Democrats and all the media, all the mainstream media, all the talking pundits, all the MSNBCs, ABCs, NBC, CNBC, CNN. I mean, I could go on. We have a lot of alphabet letters there. But the point of the matter is that, we did not see a tremendous takeover in the House. It continued, larger takeover by the Democrats. We didn't see the Senate drop. We actually gained seats in certain areas. They lost seats in certain areas. So we do have a firewall that's sitting there. And historically speaking, when you have a divided House that way, House versus Senate, different parties, there is a more rewarding environment for the stock market to improve well. So I guess that's why the market's been responding the way it is. Had it gone the other way, I think it would have really been dire. And then I'm going to try and get a starring role in Dinesh's next movie.
Well, we got him right here, right now. This is your audition. Very pleased to have with us Dinesh D'Souza, a great American author, filmmaker, has written well over a dozen books, including many New York Times bestsellers, and his latest film, Trump Card. Dinesh, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you. It's good to be on the show.
So, you've written on socialism and the danger of socialism. We're a national show. We're over 100 stations all over the country. We're really proud of that on the Armed Forces Network. Very, very proud of that. But we actually are sitting here in South Florida right now. And, of course, we're connected in with our studio up in Washington. But it was amazing what happened in South Florida, a complete repudiation of socialism. I think that Florida is the model for the Republican Party going forward. Lots of minorities, a repudiation of socialism, and the love of the American dream. I mean, that's what happened in Florida.
Well, Neil, yes, following up on that, and let's get Dinesh's point on that, but the number of Democratic voters versus number of Republican voters, we really did a great job in South Florida. We absolutely brought together and amalgamated the Hispanic community, those coming out of Latin America, those coming out of Cuba particularly, obviously, and they were a solid block. I mean, think about this. Shalala, ex-University of Miami president, and also the congressman from down here, lost her seat to Maria Salazar, a woman we had on the show just a few weeks ago. I'm very pleased to report on that. So, yeah, I think Florida showed where it's going, and I think we did a good job on that.
So, what do you say, Dinesh? How do you see what's the I guess it's not over, but what's the postmortem here?
Well, I mean, I agree about the potential of Florida. In fact, it throws my mind back to the early 80s when James Q. Wilson, a Harvard historian and economist, political scientist, wrote an article called Reagan Country. And he was actually talking about California and how California, for exactly the reasons you described, embodied the American dream. And of course, Reagan was from California. California, I think, no longer embodies that dream. But Florida might have taken California's place. And you could almost write an essay today, Florida Country, that talks about this. Now, I do want to register kind of a note of caution about what you were saying earlier about the market and the sort of the wonders of divided government. The left has no intention of having this divided government last. And so their goals are twofold. I think, number one, to put unbearable media pressure on the Senate to cave. And they will do this relentlessly. Most Republicans do not have the Trump sort of fighting spirit of being able to say, sorry, no, we're not going to be doing that. They will go after them one by one to try to pick off the weak links. And number two, if they've got a formula for kind of election rigging, if you will, on a major scale, let's just say, for example, by normalizing the mail-in ballots and mailing, hundreds of millions of these ballots like bushels all over the country, that will change the dynamics in the future. Basically, the Republicans will have difficulty winning any election in the future. So that's why it seems to me important not just to say, hey, we'll fix this process eventually. The way to fix the process eventually is to make sure it's fixed now.
So, Dinesh, very interesting comment, but, picking off members of the Senate, I think that the reason why the Republicans have the Senate is because of the wacky ideas were rejected. Stacking the courts, totally rejected. The Green New Deal and, having the Senate to be able to shut that down, raising taxes, new states. My goodness, new states. What a power grab that would be. So are you saying that you believe that there would be 2-3 Republicans who could be cracked?
Yes, I think that when you take, for example, the Susan Collins, Murkowski, Romney, just start with those three, and there are probably a couple of other kind of wobbly Republicans. The Republican majority is tenuous, and if it goes down, it's been 53, but let's say it goes down to 52 or 51. Remember, Trump had that Republican majority in the Senate in the first term, but it was very weak, and it was very easy for the Democrats to try to peel off one or two guys. And you can only imagine the influence now that they've seen the power of the media. See, the media was able to suppress the biggest story of the whole election, which was the Biden scandal. And their basic idea was, okay, conservatives, you have a story. You might even have all the facts. Let's see how many people you can get those facts to. 2 million, 3 million. Well, our media reaches 100, 200 million people. So we're just going to basically shut off the spigot on those guys and let's see. So I don't think that the average American even knew about a lot of the stuff that was out there about these scandals simply because the media decided we're just not going to cover it.
Well, you're right. So what we really have here is something that you would see in a third world, or you'd see in Latin America in the 27 years I was down there, or you'd see actually in Eastern Bloc countries. The truth doesn't really matter. The truth is what we say the truth is going to be, and which is exactly what happened in this election. No one knew the truth. No one knew what was going on, as you're pointing out, very aptly pointing out. Plus, when you surround yourself, Dinesh, with people like Bernie Sanders. This is you can't make this up. Bernie Sanders, the head of labor. How perfect is that? The Bolsheviks are attacking. Elizabeth Warren, in charge of the Treasury. She hates banks and hates Wall Street, albeit she does take their money. AOC, in charge of energy and the new Green Deal. Then you have Beto O'Rourke playing with your Second Amendment. This is, Dinesh, this is very scary stuff. So it looks like they still could have, as you're pointing out, an incredibly strong bloc that will just destroy anybody that gets in front of them.
Yeah, and let me dwell on the media for a moment because, see, my wife's from Venezuela. Now, in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, later Maduro, they were able to bring the media into conformity, but they had to do it by beating them up. They had to sort of go to the newspaper offices and corral those guys and lock them up or threaten to lock them up, and then they basically fell into line. Now, here's what's interesting. The Democrats don't have to do that. Think of it. We've just got hundreds of media organizations, thousands of journalists. So, and we have a free market. So any journalist at the Sacramento Bee or, let's say, working for Channel 4 in Chicago could have said, listen, nobody else is covering the Bobulinski story. I'll jump out front. I'll be a hero. I'll be one of the biggest names in the country. So why didn't that guy do it? Why didn't the market work in that sense? And I think the reason is this. The left has such a regime of conformity through its own media that guy knows that if he goes out front and reports on the story, his own boss will cut his throat, politically speaking, or at least in terms of his career. He'd be out on the street. He'd never work in that town again. And so there's such a regime of I can't do it, because if I depart from the lockstep of the rest of the media, I'll have no career left.
Hey, Dinesh, that's very, very well said. And how important do you think the courts are in having a conservative court and the federal courts, at the various levels, and then right up to the Supreme Court? I think that's important, right? A lot of this wacky stuff will get litigated.
No question. If we're going to be put in a position of 4 years of sort of block and tackle, then having both the Senate and the Supreme Court is important. That's our only stopgaps against, the country not just lurching, but sort of running toward the socialist direction. So, yeah, I think the courts will end up being a kind of standing legacy of Trump. And the Supreme Court appointment of Amy Coney Barrett, in retrospect, could not have been more critical.
Yeah, very, very important thing. Hey, Dinesh, we got to take a quick break. Can you stick around for a few more minutes?
I don't know if I can. I'm sorry to say, I think I may have to flee, at least at the 30.
Okay. Yeah, boy, it's been a really great time. Well, hey, look, at 30, I think we can do it. Let's you jump off when you have to. We'll just take this next few minutes if you can. But we just got to
Gotcha.
Take a quick break and then stay as long as you can and then go. I know that this is very big for you. You're in great demand. We're going to take a quick break. Dinesh is going to be right back. Dr. Rothman, stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we have with us Dinesh D'Souza, author, filmmaker, many, many books, several New York Times bestsellers. The Trump Card, his latest film. I'm sure he's got many more projects in the works. So, Dinesh, so where do we go from here? And where do you go from here? Let's just assume for a second there will be a Biden presidency. Not yet. I don't want to put that out there and make this a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if it were to happen, what are you going to be most focused on in these months ahead?
Well, I think I've been focused in the last few years on trying to build, not just in the documentary space, but in the feature film space, a kind of conservative, you may say, presence in Hollywood. Now, not in the ideological sense, but rather to create space for movies that are different than the typical movies that Hollywood makes. I'm beginning to think, however, that the pressing problem in the country is media. And by media, I mean the sort of monopoly that the left has on reaching the vast swath of the American people. We have nothing on the right that competes with it. The reach, even of organs like Fox, is relatively limited. So I'm thinking that there needs to be a concerted effort, which I want to be part of, to create media, mainstream media, that reaches tens of millions of Americans. So we are not reliant on everything going through the refracting filter of people who wish us no good.
Well, I think it's very vital. If you even going back to basic Marshall McLuhanism, when you talk about the medium is the message, it doesn't matter what the message is. The message is out there, and that's what people believe. And he who controls that message controls thought. So I think what you're saying is incredibly important. If not for the mainstream media this time around, Biden never would have gotten anywhere the way he is today. Never would have happened.
Dinesh, I just got to ask you. I know you got to go, but a good friend of ours is Chris Ruddy over at Newsmax. I've worked a lot with Chris. I know that you have too. What do you think about Newsmax? And is Newsmax going to be capable of rising up?
Is that the next generation?
Is that it? Is this what's going to happen? People like Chris and Newsmax, and is this the new media that we're looking for?
I think there's going to be many flowers blooming. There's Newsmax. There's, of course, The First with Bill O'Reilly. There's, there's The Daily Wire. There's the One America News Network. And all of these are trying to sort of gain a strong foothold and also to expand. But it is also the case that their reach as of now is still quite limited. And so I think there is a desperate need to provide a massive channel for Americans, and not just a kind of 24-hour news channel.
What I don't know, why doesn't some of these conservatives, I mean, very wealthy conservatives, we got a lot of very wealthy conservatives, why doesn't a conservative group go and buy one of the networks? I mean, why has that not happened?
Because they, in general, until now, I don't think have seen the need for it. When they look at these kinds of investments, they like to think in terms of return, which is the natural economic way to think. But see, Jeff Bezos, when he forked out $250 million to buy the Washington Post, he wasn't thinking about return. He was thinking, my God, this is the Washington Post. And so that's the way we have to think, is ultimately to build these channels. And if you do, I think the revenue will come, just as with Fox.
And then final question, how do we deal with these tech giants? How do we deal with the Facebooks and the Twitters that absolutely, beyond that, control the ability to communicate?
The bad news is that if we're in a Biden administration, we won't be dealing with them, and I think we won't be able to do anything about them any more than we'd be able to do anything about the deep state. Those investigations will shut down. Those people will essentially feel empowered. So I think that the only option in that case is going to be to build and encourage alternative platforms. So instead of Twitter, we have Parler. Instead of YouTube, we have Rumble. I'm building on these alternative platforms. I don't quit them. I don't quit Twitter. But I'm just creating these backup platforms because I just don't like this feeling of a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. I want to make sure that if the sword drops, I've got someplace else to go.
Well, Dinesh, I know it's. I don't want to make you spend more time. I know that you're in high demand. It's time for you to leave us. I know that. Thanks for coming on the show and carving out the time and sticking around with us. Our listeners are really, really grateful that you came in today to be with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye. So, Rich, the media, a very, very good point, the media. And I read something earlier today saying that these fake polls, and we now know that
that's
they were
exactly
all fake.
What I was thinking.
They were all fake.
Good discussion.
That was actually putting off demoralizing potential Trump voters and actually had an impact on the election just because they put out all this fake information and people said, well, why vote? Because it's a foregone conclusion. It's a landslide. We're nowhere near this thing. I'm not going to take the hour off work. I'm not going to use my paid time off or whatever it was. I'm not going to go get a babysitter. I'm going to, because it's not going to be worthwhile. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Imagine if that was true, the perverse outcome that it created and how it impacted things so negatively. Like we say, like election. You said it earlier today before we started the show that elections don't matter because they're rigged, and they're rigged because of these things.
No, this is my takeaway from the election so far, and maybe it'll change. That I think we do live in the matrix, because I do believe that certain people control everything that we do, and the decisions that we make fall within the parameters of those who create those decisions for us. So, in other words, Neil, just before we go to the break, choose well. Do you choose the blue pill or do you choose the red pill?
We'll leave everybody with that thought here, but we have another great guest coming up. Stephen Moore, economist, advisor to President Trump, all-around good guy. We see him all over the media right now doing commentary on what's going on in our country. He's going to be with us right now. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Hey, Rich, man, it's always great to have Dinesh D'Souza. I mean, we've worked with him a lot over the years. That whole sham thing that the Obama administration came up with, what was it? Something to do with campaign contributions?
He bundled campaigns. He bundled campaign contributions, and everyone was doing it.
It was,
but he went to prison.
But it was political retribution.
Terrible.
I mean, it's terrible that happened to Dinesh. But he's kept his great attitude. He's out there doing wonderful things, documentaries, best-selling books, and he's looking to create alternative media. Wow. We need him more than ever. But right now we have Stephen Moore great friend of the show. Stephen's been with us at different points. He's with the Wall Street Journal. He was with the Heritage Foundation, economic advisor to the president, and also now with Freedom Works. A great American. You see him all over the media right now. Very pleased to have him with us, Stephen Moore. Stephen, welcome to Made in America.
Hi, guys. Great to be with you.
So, Stephen, it looks like the markets are going with the narrative right now that it's going to be gridlock. A Republican Senate, Biden's going to eke out the win by perhaps as low as 272 electoral votes, and the House is now a much smaller majority, and that whole radical agenda was largely rejected, but you can't say 100% rejected. Where are you coming in on this? You may have a very different opinion than that.
Well, the presidential race is certainly not over. There's about 4 or 5 states that still aren't, votes aren't counted. They're all razor tight. I'd say I give the president right now about a 1 in 3 chance of winning. So it's still all in play. And then you've got the House, as you said, that the Republicans picked up seats in the House. And the Senate, it looks like right now the Republicans will have anywhere between 50 and 53 seats. And if there's 50, that's a bit of a problem because then, of course, if Biden wins the election, then Harris, as vice president, would have the tie-breaking vote. So there's a little tiny bit of apprehension about that. I would say the odds are, at most 1 in 5 that the Democrats could win the Senate, or at least, get a tie in the Senate. And I think what's going on, I think you said it very well, the stock market has been zooming over the last couple of days, and that's because, we thought that there might be a blue wave. There was no blue wave. The voters really rejected the Democrats in large part. In fact, the only Republican that of great significance that lost might be the president himself. And so we will see about that. I hope not, because I think it's a great president in terms of his economic performance.
Well, you're right, and there wasn't a blue wave, and actually, the Republicans did fairly well, not just on the national level, but we all, except for the president. But we'll see. We're very optimistic. We're hopeful for that. But also on a state level, state houses did very well with the Republicans. It just didn't hit the way the Democrats thought it was going to hit, and at this point, Pelosi might even be in danger of being removed.
There is some chance. I'd say maybe a 20% chance Republicans could actually win the House. There are about 18 or so seats that are contested right now. I haven't done the exact math, but I'm told that it's quite possible Republicans could take the House. I don't think that's probable, but everything's up for grabs right now. Here we are, 2 days after the election, and still a lot of uncertainty. I will be very disappointed if the president loses, because I think we're not. Look, we've had an incredible economy under Donald Trump. I mean, there's no question about that. He's been as good a president on the economy as we've ever had. And then we have the pandemic, and then he's built this incredible revival to the economy that nobody thought was possible. We had that 33% growth. We got another really good jobs number this morning. I'm so frustrated because people by election day. They voted for Trump, and the people who voted for Biden were typically people who voted 2 or 3 weeks ago by mail. If we didn't have election month but election day, I don't think there's any question that Trump would have won by a sizable margin.
Yeah, I mean that's a very, very good observation. I don't like to be hypothetical, but I'm going to be hypothetical. Let's just say that it is going the way that it looks like. At least the better odds are that Trump doesn't get it, and the Senate becomes Republican, and the House has got a very thin majority one way or another. I mean, what Trump did with the courts is absolutely monumentally important, right? I mean, because the only way that Biden is going to be able to rule is through executive order. And I know you've been on with us many times when Obama was a president, and he was ruling by pen and phone with executive orders. But it got to the courts, and then it was kind of 50-50 what would happen. But right now, Trump did an amazing job of remaking the courts. How important is that going forward?
Well, Trump does think one of his great legacies, whether it's for 4 years or 8 years, has been his transformation of the courts and putting, conservative justices on the court that are pro-business and pro-constitution. And that's been a huge, huge benefit. And it's as he said, people could be on the court for 30 or 40 years. So that's enormously important. You said something about the regulatory state that's important, because I don't see Republicans in the Senate, assuming they hold on to the Senate, being at all, very excited about anything Biden wants to do. By the way, I don't think there's a single thing in the Biden economic agenda that would be good for the country. Almost everything he's proposed, from getting rid of right-to-work laws to massive tax increases to destroying the oil and gas industry, I could go on and on, are very negative for the economy. And so at least we have this restraint on potential President Biden, but he still will be able to do through executive orders and regulations. Asked me is, do you think that Joe Biden will, outlaw fracking? And I always said, no, he's not going to outlaw fracking. He's just going to destroy the industry by strangling it to death. Just as the left didn't outlaw coal. All they did was made it impossible for the coal miners and the coal companies to make money.
Well, that's exactly what Obama said. He was very clear about that, Steve.
Yeah.
He said, look, no. You could have those, but it's going to be very expensive and they'll go bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly. And then he was very effective at that. And, of course, tens of thousands of coal miners lost their jobs. So that was a very sad thing, because we have clean coal in this country. And meanwhile, the Chinese and the Indians are building hundreds of coal plants. Good as that. I mean, your show is Made in America. We have more oil and gas and coal and minerals than any other country in the world. My goodness, it's going to be hard to be able to produce those under Biden. He is in the in the hip pocket of the radical environmentalists, just as he is in the hip pocket of the liberal teachers unions. So it's going to be a battle, between Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden if it turns out that way.
Stephen, thanks for being on the show. I mean, it's always wonderful to talk to you. I know you're in high demand right now, and you're very, very busy. Your voice is very important. We really, really appreciate what you're doing, and we look forward to having you back real soon. Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some thoughts about what's going on in our country and what that means to your jobs.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Rich, Stephen Moore, great American, really spot on the economy and what the recovery has been in the jobs report and what the GDP growth was. It was just released, a couple of weeks ago, 33%?
Yes, on an annualized basis, 33.1% for the third quarter. That is the largest GDP recorded in 70 years since they were recording the GDP.
So it's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And, to be hypothetical, I don't like to be hypothetical, but to be hypothetical, under a Trump, if Biden does pull this off, what do you think will happen? I mean, what do you think will happen to that? Do you see us taking a huge step backwards economically, or has this train left the station and, it's not going to be impacted all that much?
I don't think the train left the station. I think the station's going to get shut down. Biden.
Very good point.
You like that one? You like that metaphor?
Very good point.
I kind of like that one. But, no, truthfully, he made very, very clear, Biden made it very, very clear that he was going to eliminate all the tax cuts.
But he can't now.
Well, he can try and do stuff like that.
Well,
Some of it was executive order.
To be hypothetical, the Republicans retain the Senate. Any sort of changing of the tax code has to pass through the Senate. So under that scenario, he can only do things with executive order, right?
But as our guest has said, Dinesh D'Souza has said, that they will put, they being the Democrats, will put incredible media pressure on the 2 or 3 or 4 people that are the weakest in the Senate,
but
and go after them. So here's my point. You asked the question, what's going to go forward? It's a multiple platform answer. Number one, if in fact you can play with the tax breaks that the president put in. Here's another one. Regulations that the president took away, he can put regulations back.
By executive order.
By executive order. They will get challenged in court, and hopefully the Republicans control the courts, but you never know. So that's a problem. Number two, we're trying to figure out whether corporations will be comfortable coming here anymore, or they're going to stay overseas for a while. With Trump being here, it became very, very good to repatriate monies that we had overseas and start companies and grow things that are over in the United States. If, in fact, we can't do that, if, in fact, people are worried that we're going to wind up with ridiculous taxes and tariffs and so forth on what we're trying to accomplish, they're not going to come here. They're going to stay overseas the way they were during the Obama administration. So, in other words, that word is uncertainty. If there's uncertainty, that doesn't do well. In the long run, people go conservative. People, in terms of spending their money, they hold back. And if they hold back, are they going to expand their corporations if they don't know where anything's going right now? I don't think so. I think they're going to be in a holding pattern and try and keep what they've got, as you're describing, to the best that they can before they start investing all sorts of money to grow. So what does that mean? What's the implication of that? I guess that means job growth. I don't know about it. Do you think that under Biden, the job growth that we have right now would continue? Particularly if he puts Bernie Sanders watched the movie Dr. Zhivago and was cheering for the wrong side. I mean, this is where that guy's at. Bernie Sanders in charge of labor. Do you think that's a good statement? That statement scares the hell out of me.
And we mentioned earlier about Elizabeth Warren at the Treasury.
Oh my God, Elizabeth Warren looks like.
Yeah, but see, what I think,
my God,
it's terrible. What
terrible.
I think is that the Democrats. I mean, if looking at the media, I mean, the Democrats are hugely disappointed. I mean, there's a lot of self-reflection going on, and you had a lot of conservative women win in the House, an amazing thing. The Republicans have done so well with minorities. I mean, a lot of Democrats, the media, all of the Hollywood crowd are looking back and saying, my goodness, what happened? Nearly 70 million people voted for.
Do you know what
Trump.
it was?
This wasn't a repudiation.
Yes, that's exactly where I'm going.
That they were expecting. It did 100%. Not happen.
Right. But it did repudiate the Hollywood elites. It repudiated them. Oh, we can't have with it. We're going to grow. We're going to take. We're going to become much more blue. And it didn't work that way. But with their viciousness, listen to that. The point is, Democrats are vicious. That's one thing the Republicans necessarily are not. Democrats are vicious. They will tear you up. They will rip your heart out intellectually, maybe even physically. Who knows? If you don't go along with the agenda, they're willing to do it. They've shown that. Look what they did to our good guest, Dinesh D'Souza. For something that every campaign's had, conflating different types of those who are supporting them with money. All right, he winds up in prison. He goes to prison. No one did that with the Obama administration, and other folks did that. He goes to prison. He's treated that way. They're vicious. They're very vicious, and I think that's the loose cannon in the whole thing.
Yeah. Then the whole issue of the Pelosi, does she keep the speakership in the House? It's also a repudiation of Pelosi because
there's no question. I agree with that.
She was way, way, way out there on all this stuff, expecting to improve upon her majority, and she's now razor thin if she keeps it, and we don't even know that. Hey, folks, we still got a lot more to talk about. Dr. Rothman and I are going to talk more about your jobs, where this economy is going, and how important that is to all of us. Stay around.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. For a moment, understand or just kind of say or just kind of put that out there. President Trump, for whatever reason, he doesn't get through this. And, there's all this uncertainty about the election. Was it legitimate? Was there a lot of illegal votes? And none of that is really fleshed out. And this thing gets hung up in the courts. Whatever happens. Who knows what happens? But imagine the platform that President Trump is going to have going forward. I mean, just the platform. If he's the victim of the deep state, if he's the victim of a corrupt media in the pockets of a Democrat party, just think about that. If it's believed that the media essentially was making campaign contributions to the Democrats to defeat Trump in the way that they were giving all this free positive media. It was like every time they were there, reporting the news, it was not news. It was campaign advertisements for Biden that Biden didn't have to pay for, right? Well, it was all free stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And if President Trump is a victim of that, and he's a victim of this corruption that exists in the American political elite, together with the media elite, President Trump is going to be a martyr. I mean, they're going to look at him like, he's the embodiment. Democrats got to be careful what they wish for here.
Well, wait a minute. So he's a martyr, but what happened to Joan of Arc? She was a martyr. Didn't go well for her.
But it creates a movement and it creates a
She
wave.
rode a horse well, but they still got her.
Yeah, you understand what I'm saying, though.
Yeah.
But it unleashes something. It unleashes something very powerful. And by the way, that's why we have elections here. In 2 years from now, there's going to be a midterm election.
Well, wait a minute. Isn't that exactly what happened with Obama? He came in, he pushed through Obamacare. He was pretty arrogant about the whole thing. They bought, paid. Look at all the deals they cut.
But he won in a landslide against McCain, who never fought, who never did anything. He came in as a bona fide, legitimate president. And McCain, whatever he did,
but
he crawled under a rock.
The populists took back. Listen, for a while he owned all three. He had valet parking going in all three houses. They were all, Obamacare parking. That's what it was. And it went away. You remember? The Tea Party came out, and Tea Party changed things, and all of a sudden, he didn't have all the houses in Congress anymore. We put up a firewall. Then, of course, what did he do? Well, let me think. Oh, that's right. He politicized, the FBI, the IRS. The IRS, the first thing they did, what did they do? The IRS goes against the Tea Party and refuses to let other Tea Party groups that were trying to form get their 501c3 rating and qualification so they can take money in. So he tried to kill the future election as a result of that and lock it down. I want to go back to a point that you made. I think you made one of the most important points that people see every day and they're part of. And certainly we're seeing it right now. Even this morning in the news, Twitter and Facebook. Twitter and Facebook are controlling thought. That's a fact. The guys running it are far to the left. They're globalists. They hate Trump. There's no question they hate them. They shut him down. They don't get the truth out. That, to me, is an enormously great contribution. That's sort of like trading. Here, I'm going to give you $500 million worth of advertising, worth of value. But I'm not going to write you a check for $1 billion or $500 million. I'm going to let you just get your word out, and I'm going to keep the other guy's word out. What is that worth, Neil?
Well, we just seen it in this election, and certainly, if that weren't the case, all of these states to where there's 100,000, 50,000 majority, votes, if that's what it took to win the state, that all goes away and turns back to Trump.
Okay, here's the question. Here's the question that we can leave the show with today. It has been said, and a lot of people believe it, and I may be one of them, that Biden, as we discussed before, Biden says, I am the Democratic Party. I beg your pardon. You are not the Democratic Party. You're the patsy for the Democratic Party. Do we think that Biden will be there come 6 months from now? Or are we going to have, Kamala Harris as the president and Nancy Pelosi as the vice president? Do you think that's a possibility?
You're asking me how long will Biden last?
No, I think he'll last.
He will not last the 4 years. I just don't know where in this period of time.
I agree with that.
We're in this.
The question is, how soon does it happen?
Yeah, well, some people think it could be sooner than later. But this has all huge impact on our jobs, on our economy, on our prosperity, and so important. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.